Welcome to the long-awaited showcase of the Claxe Best Perks. This weapon is a sleeper pick, as we say it, that I have been sneaking into my daily videos for a long time. I've been hyping the Claxe for so many weeks, and I am not kidding. As you're probably already seeing from the gameplay, this weapon just annihilates. In fact, the entire time I was recording, I was basically just thinking,
what the was that damage, my guy?
The entire time, because this weapon is just inexplicably good. The Claxe, I think, I have a couple theories, we'll talk about it later, but it kills way faster than it should, and best of all, has a few things going for it. First and foremost, it is a base game weapon. You can probably find the Claxe in your inventory right now. If you haven't cleaned out your inventory in a while, it's probably just sitting there waiting to be used, and if you throw on the perks I'm going to recommend later, you're going to be very impressed with it. And one of the theories that I've got is that the affliction on this weapon, we are running it with an affliction build, is almost not only equaling but exceeding how much damage you're outputting with Luna and the weapon itself. And if it takes longer than a second to kill like a smasher or a mist monster, it basically doubles the damage output, and it is really, really powerful. I'm not 100% aware of how affliction works in this game. A long time ago it got buffed to do a bunch of damage. The community loved it. They nerfed it back to normal. We got very upset. Then they just quietly put it back in the game, and I have found a number of weapons, the Claxe being of course one of them, where the affliction does either way less than it should or way more. And maybe that's a bigger breakdown video in the future that's needed, but for now I know the Claxe is one of those weapons that crits way harder than it should, as you can see. So yeah, the Claxe doesn't need much more of an introduction. This weapon does actually hold up in the 160 zones. That's where I first found it. Somebody recommended I used it. I was like, you know what, screw it. I made it all gold, leveled it up, and it was way more powerful than I expected. If I was going to rank the melees in a tier list, which I probably will someday, I would honestly put this weapon in S tier. Its damage, at least from personal experience, I haven't specifically ran the numbers in the calculator because, again, a lot of that damage that we're experiencing in-game is incalculable. Of course, you could look at the damage numbers and math it out, but the affliction doesn't always hit for the same amount, and I do believe that's where a lot of our output is coming. But what I'm saying is, it swings on par with, like, the Ravager. Like, its damage output is comparable to some of the strongest melees in the game, and let's just get right into the perks and exactly how we're achieving this. The build I went with is, of course, a double attack speed build, because Paleo Luna is nuts. We'll talk about the loadout in just a second. A damage perk makes a lot of sense here. I don't think anything else is even worth it. The heavy attack is so slow that it's not worth it, by the way. I don't have any footage of me using it because every time I've tried it, I was instantly like, yeah, no, this is slow. That damage is not doing it, and that's it. And I mentioned earlier, one of the best things about this weapon is that it's base game. The other thing is you can have it every single element, which sounds normal, but if you think about it, some of the better weapons in the game can't be. The Ravager can only be energy or physical. The Spectral Blade can only be physical, energy, or water for some reason. I don't know. And then you get weapons like the Storm Blade, which has great crit explosions, but it can only be energy. And then the Founder's Masamune is only fire. Well, my point is, a lot of the weapons that are really great in this game are locked to specific elements, and the Claxe is not. It can be anything you want. In fact, a lot of the gameplay I recorded for today's video was me just switching between my Claxes the whole time. I had one for every element because this weapon has been recommended on stream a lot because I keep hyping it, and every time somebody wants me to use it, the element seems to be different, and I found myself with a copy of each. I only have one schematic, but I keep changing the element around because I want to use it all the time. So that's kind of how I ended up with that. But of course, we have the damage to afflicted. This one could be a little bit different, but because I highly recommend affliction on this, I cannot stress that enough. I think damage to afflicted is always going to be a great option. Like I said several times, affliction is doing a lot on this weapon. I got a little bit of gameplay you can see where I hit an enemy and then the affliction is doing consistently more than the initial hit every single second. I don't know if that literally doubles your damage output, but it definitely increases it significantly. So I think damage to afflicted is important here. And then if you look at the other 6 perks, crit rating is kind of nice. That's definitely okay, but hitting an enemy is what you need to do to stack up that crit rating. Typically the enemy is already dead by then, and trust me, crowds of enemies do not really stay alive very long to utilize that. Movement is fun, but ensnare is no. Affliction is definitely the way to go on this. So I feel like this set is pretty much all you'd want. There really isn't another way to run it. You wouldn't want a crit build because you'd be giving up a ton of attack speed. I know we're using Paleoluna with this, so if you wanted to do double crit damage and try this with Totally Rocking Out, that could be worth it. I do warn you, you are going to probably still want an attack speed perk. So if you want to go crit damage and run Totally Rocking Out, you can, but I think it's important that I show the loadout and explain what's happening. Obviously, Luna, she is benefiting a lot of our damage based on our health. That's extremely important. Coconuts are, of course, I mean, a lot of this is going to be very typical. Coconuts are to keep our health up, buff our damage. I ate it before almost every fight. Saurian Vigor, I'll explain. Hide, because it's awesome and it gives you a lot of health. But if you look at the different dinos in this game, we're not using abilities. We're not using energy. We're not using abilities again. We're not using range weapons. Currently in this game, Vigor sucks, but it's really just the only thing that makes sense in this build, so that's what we got. But this is where things get a little more interesting. Battle Beat is something that is really, really good for buffing your attack speed, and because, yes, of course, we are using an axe, I am using Dennis Jr., where eliminations have an 11% chance to grant Rock and Riff. In crowds of enemies, that is super, super useful, and it activates quite often, and I really can't recommend it enough. Battle Beat is something you could swap for like Whiteout Fiona. She does up your chance to crit, and the crit damage on this weapon is 75% naturally, so without even having any crit perks, you're still gonna get a little bit of use out of this. I'm not certain if Battle Beat is better or not. This one comes up to opinion. Anatomy Lessons is really nice. You could easily use Assassin Sarah to get extra damage out of it as well. These are all nice because unlike most melees where you run double attack speed, triple attack speed, and just farm Luna, you're still getting almost 34,000 damage out of this solo. Its attack speed isn't significant. In fact, if you compare it to a weapon like the Ravager, I know this is not a very fair comparison, but I just wanted to illustrate that the Ravager does a little less damage but swings basically twice as fast. Not exactly, but close enough, and so it's not really going to out damage it on paper. But my point is, a lot of weapons, you get double attack speed and the damage output is so low that almost all of your damage is coming from Luna. The Stabs with the Third is a great example where you're swinging super fast but doing quite a bit less than the Claxe. A lot more than I initially expected, but my point is having some weapon damage could go a little ways. But I do believe this to be the best perk loadout. Double attack speed is just killer, and this weapon is an absolute treat. I wonder how many sleeper picks are out there, you guys. If you can comment down below a melee or a weapon that I haven't given enough attention to, I can point out a couple right now. The Vacuum Tube Spear and the Vacuum Tube Axe are both quite strong. That chain lightning goes a long way. If you are running in a water mission, it goes very far into crowd clearing and is super, super useful. I, for one, am a fan of both of those weapons, but the masses haven't caught on. So hopefully we'll see the Claxe in some more missions. I think it's worth it. This weapon is definitely one you should wipe the dust off of and give a try. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista at your checkout. These videos take a lot of work, and I really appreciate it. It took me about 45 minutes to get clips of Smashers dying, so if you guys want to help me out, I'd appreciate it a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. And then